Ça, c'est notre objectif. Cet ammoniac permettra au Congo de mettre en place les chaînes de fertilisation agricole. Ceci permettra au Congo d'aller vers l'autosuffisance alimentaire. Parce qu'il est connu que l'autosuffisance alimentaire est aujourd'hui le goulot d'étranglement de tous les pays africains, sans exception. Et donc, il n'y a pas de développement en Afrique si nous continuons à vivre dans l'autosuffisance alimentaire. Donc, l'ammoniac que nous allons produire aura un but de production d'ammoniac. La seconde partie de production, nous l'avons planifiée pour transporter l'hydrogène. Donc on se servira de l'ammoniac pour transporter l'hydrogène dans les pays limitrophes qui en feront la demande. Et le troisième aspect de cet hydrogène, c'est faire de telle sorte que les localités dans lesquelles les localités qui sont dans la zone où seront produits cet hydrogène, eh bien, ces localités-là auront une électrification décarbonée. Ces localités-là auront un transport, disons, décarboné aussi, c'est-à-dire la motorisation des moyens de transport d'origine thermique à base hybride et à pile combustible. Donc, voilà un peu le projet actuellement lancé par la SNPC pour la production d'hydrogène. Alors, vous avez posé la question de savoir si nous allons seuls. Alors, le projet fait pratiquement aujourd'hui 3 ans et demi. Au début, dans notre aventure, nous étions seuls. Nous avions vraiment dépensé de l'argent dans le renouvelable pour acquérir les nouvelles données, pour faire ces études et avoir ce résultat-là. Donc, lorsque nous commencions hier, on était seuls. La SCP était seule, c'est un projet national. Et à partir du moment où nous avions eu des bons résultats, eh bien, à ce moment, nous avons eu des partenaires qui sont rejoints à nous et avec lesquels nous sommes en train actuellement de signer le partenariat pour développer ce projet.
Great. Perhaps, we'll touch on the topic again. Garrith, I want to bring you back here again. You're seeing more and more African countries starting to develop hydrogen products. We spoke about the bubble earlier on, that there's a bit of a pin in that bubble. Clearly, policies are required to keep this momentum going. So what is it that we need in place to maintain the momentum? Two, there's this value chain. Everyone just thinks there's a hydrogen development in this space, but obviously it opens up much more room. So how do we stimulate and develop this value chain? And do you have specific examples where you're starting to see the rollout across this whole hydrogen value chain?
No, look, I think a number of the things will actually issues will cut across, but for me there's sort of 2 or 3 issues that stand out that I think, in my experience, we have identified as challenges on the continent specifically. One relates to the policy environment, and I think Margaret gave a key example earlier of Mauritania in relation to bespoke legislation and policy that speaks directly to green hydrogen.
Yeah.
Now that is sometimes where we also need to take from, I think the program director used a very nice phrase that stuck with me about not chasing perfection, and sort of impeding progress. And I think some African countries try and chase the perfection in the form of having comprehensive, overarching strategies covering a range of issues. There's the hugely contested space around colorization and different types of technologies and all of these other things. I think, again, using from the example of an African country, or an African example, which I think is quite commendable, is the Kenyan example of a green hydrogen strategy, which is, in my view, one of the most succinct, very clear policy instruments that I have seen. Very short document that was released for public consumption, but very, very targeted, very clear around what it is that they are supposed to, what it is that the intent is, what they want to achieve, focusing both on export as well as domestic use of the product, but then also basically aligning timelines and responsibilities across the value chain, allocating roles and responsibilities to different stakeholders, making sure that everyone is part of the package in an inclusive approach. So I think that is one key lesson that we could, for instance, learn from a South African context. We tend to go for the big ones and not focus on the attainable, targeted, sort of clearly directed programs. Yeah. So that for me is the one thing. The second one is that we really have to do more around financing. Initiatives such as the African Energy Bank is commendable, that it is happening, but I think we should also sort of flex our muscles on the global stage more and keep and hold people accountable around, one, commitments that were made around climate change funding and decarbonization generally, but also making sure that we are part of those discussions around new instruments. Export insurance facilities, all of these instruments that are available in the market that would make projects more bankable, especially in an African context, where the cost of finance is still quite high and it's impeding. Lastly, the key issue, and again, I think it has come out in some of the earlier sessions across the broader energy value chain that this conference is actually looking at, is the issue of enabling infrastructure. And I think, again, this is where governments need to play quite a central role. And I think, again, to borrow from Margaret, she spoke about roads, ports, and transmission earlier. And I think that's the key issue. And it's the role of government to provide that enabling infrastructure environment that would make it easier to attract investment, but also make sure that ultimately we use that leverage to make sure that we actually reach the areas and actually deal with the ESG component of what we are doing by doing that. Balancing export needs or the export market and domestic demand, I'm of the view that on green ammonia alone, and the fact that Africa is the breadbasket of the world and green ammonia is used in fertilizer, if you take a continental, regional approach to that, we can actually create a domestic market for green ammonia without having to export a single drop in the first few years of production. That export even can become a secondary option. But that would require some harmonization around policy and regulation in regions, in the continent as a whole, for instance, at an AU level, but also much more cooperation bilaterally between states, but also at the multilateral level. I think that will sort of give impetus to the progress. There's some good progress in Egypt, in Morocco, Namibia, South Africa. There's a number of very good announcements and so on. We've been a bit slow out of the blocks in terms of getting to further project phases, but I think we are getting there. So all this well and good, but we need to make sure that we do the necessary enablement to make these attractive for investment and further development.
Thank you, Mr. Garrith, for that. I mean, you touched on the importance of government's role and policies in order to realize our hydrogen visions. Now, knowing that also associations have a role to play in assisting countries, Joyce, my question to you would be, seeing that you are part of the Green Hydrogen Association of Africa, what is firstly the objective of this alliance, just to inform the audience what the alliance does? And then also, how does this alliance support its member countries in realizing their visions?
Great. So the African Green Hydrogen Alliance was established to give this government leadership in the realization of Africa's green hydrogen potential. So currently we are 10 members, South Africa being one, and also the current chair. The others on the southern side, we have Angola and Namibia. Then on the north, we have Mauritania, Morocco. We have then on the eastern side, Djibouti, Ethiopia, and Kenya. And these are the early movers or the fast movers when it comes to green hydrogen development. And so the support here is around, first, there's knowledge sharing and realizing that depending on the scale and the speed that we must move at to achieve the ambitious goals that we have in green hydrogen space, is that no country is going to do this on its own. So we need to collaborate and learn from each other first. And just speaking on what has already been mentioned about the policy element. So you see that Kenya, Mauritania, and Morocco have already established and set their key terms for developers. So this, what does tax incentives look like? Land access, what does local content look like? And so we create that platform for knowledge sharing. And then there's also when it comes to financing. So we've already started work supporting countries in terms of modeling your final product, derivatives, and what that looks like. And also market development, and saying the conversation has been skewed around export opportunities, but really bringing it back home and saying there are also really quite a number of domestic opportunities that exist in green hydrogen production. And looking at the Africa case, energy security is still one of the things that we must address. And so how do we develop green hydrogen in such a way that it's addressing energy security in Africa? So it's about access at the end of the day in terms of how we are developing the projects. So it's just ensuring that this policy asks are clear from a government point of view, working closely with partnerships, so private sector, again, development partners like GIZ, we work closely with GIZ in that area. And again, there's also technology development. So when you're looking at electrolyzers, and South Africa has really done so much work in then producing an electrolyzer that's African-driven. Morocco wants to do this with wind turbines. And so what are the opportunities for regional trading when it comes to even technology, as again, we diversify supply chains and just reduce our reliance on China where possible, which again, we must be working towards, because this has to be, again, about people, the jobs that we're creating for Africans, and again, transforming lives. So it's that platform, and we're hoping to also keep growing the members, and we're hoping to have Algeria, Tunisia, and Cameroon join, because they're also really developing their green hydrogen strategies at the moment.
Thank you so much, Joyce, for that. You touched on the role of the associations, right? And throughout this conversation, we've been talking about key successes. But I want to just hand over to Margaret just to tell us now, from those key successes, some of the, on the other side, there are the challenges. So what are some of the challenges that these project developers experience, either from inception to production? Yeah.
So I think one of the key challenges is, in any project, is revenue certainty. So if we look at what's contributing to revenue certainty, is offtake. So again, coming back to a project like Mauritania, we have three potential offtake vectors: green ammonia, liquid hydrogen, or green iron. And we see the same, green fertilizer, another potential offtake vector in Djibouti. But the more we work on these projects and we do the ground truthing, we realize that the cost of production of the early projects or the first projects is still the gap between cost of production and the actual willingness to pay is there. And yes, there are regulation and there's certification, there's standardization being put in place, and we see various acts internationally. But the implementation thereof, and that translating into a long-term offtake agreement for gigascale projects, is slower than what anybody anticipated. We need to be realistic. And maybe we were naive in the beginning, because you don't do billion-dollar projects overnight. So that's one of the challenges. Obviously, contributing to that gap is the cost of financing. And the cost of financing and contributing to lower the cost of financing and de-risking projects from an African perspective is alignment across Africa. So when you do a project in Africa, where you do this in Mauritania or Namibia, or that it's familiar, it gets familiar. People and financing institutions like familiarity. And we're entering in a nascent industry where there's not a lot of familiarity. Components of this is familiar, but not a long value chain. So the cost of financing is the other challenge. And availability of financing. So we're not looking at financing into those early projects, but also financing into an enabling infrastructure, port and road, early financing. But then also financing and getting the ecosystem, the business system that needs to support these projects in place. Financing for small, medium enterprises, financing for local businesses, even large-scale local businesses, so that they can get ready to be employed and to be contracted. And during the development already, grow with the project and organically grow with the project. Partnerships from outside to internal, to local business and business owners. And then, obviously, the value addition requirements. There is such a big potential for value addition, but we need to look at the workforce and say, how are we going to get this workforce ready to actually participate, to be ready to be contracted and ready to employ? And all of that ask from the governments to invest early on socioeconomic development, and invest early before they actually get the revenues from these projects, to invest into that and support into getting that investment done, getting that early investment done, so that the countries are actually ready to participate right from the start of construction. So these are the key points that I'd like to highlight.
All right, thank you.
Sifiso, Garrith was talking earlier on about this notion of global exporter, Africa becoming the basket for green hydrogen. Every time I think about this notion of you must be the main exporter, I look at every single industry that we've been in. We export, somebody else beneficiates, it comes back. How do we ensure that hydrogen as an industry and this ecosystem that we have of international local players, we actually derive the value for Africans? We use it effectively. The policies are right, but right for the people, not just the global markets. How do we ensure that we derive the value for Africans? The main theme, well, I guess NJ likes saying it, let's end energy poverty. How do we ensure we do that using hydrogen?
Thanks, Sophie. I think it starts with ourselves. And we have seen the trend of where the continent has been exposed to a number of incidents of exploitation. We carry some of the key resources, minerals that the world needs. When we don't decide to become deliberate on our agenda as Africans, to define the type of discussion that needs to take place, and also to define, especially from this type of project, the form that they need to take. As Central Energy Fund, we have had the opportunity to do a lot of benchmarking, travel across the world just to see what some of our call it friendly countries are doing. When you talk about Malaysia, you talk about China, you talk about Indonesia, and you see the deliberate effort that the countries that decide to say that their resources must be exploited in a manner that benefits the locals. Now, what does it mean for Africans? It means that, first and foremost, we need to pull a very strategic direction in terms of human resource, because it always comes down to say, we don't have capacity, we don't have the skill set. Now, when we start the journey of renewables, we then need to say what type of infrastructure or framework that are going to deliver the type of resources that we're going to need. We have, across the board in the continent, rich resources from wind as well as solar. I think in South Africa, through the hydrogen roadmap, the attempt is there. But it's all about us deciding when we sign some of these agreements to define some of these critical requirements. Now, when we invest as SEF, we take a very clear view on 4 elements, right? So we look at the technical viability, the commercial aspect of the project, we look at the legal framework, but also key to that, which our board is always insisting on, the socio-economic impact. Now, we're not talking about CSI, corporate social investment. We're talking about projects that are impactful. So we're talking about SMEs that get to be developed to support the project. Moving slightly away from hydrogen, you've got a gas-to-power program. The question is, how much is the continent preparing itself to monetize that gas? And when it monetizes it, it gets into the gas-to-power program. Who are the companies that are going to come in to actually ensure that those projects get to be implemented? And what is not just government, but companies within the country are doing to do that? That's a part that in the continent we have not done very well. We have this ability to pull together. I think this conference demonstrates that, to say what are the Africans defining as the agenda to ensure that our resources are actually utilized for the benefit of our people, of course. But we don't take away the fact that the international market has a role to play. That's why from a SEF perspective, we have signed a number of collaboration agreements. Whether you're talking about assisting from an EPC plus F, but with clear conditions, right? Whether it's just funding only, with very clear conditions, to ensure that we are able to have meaningful contribution that get to be done by the project. Because people don't own this project. There's a number of business forums that are formed in where this project takes place. And when you then listen to say, how do we ensure that people participate? And that's what people are calling for. So it is in our requirement as leaders of this industry to ensure that we have a very clear understanding and requirement of what the end state that we want. And I think hydrogen will play that role to ensure that it's another form of energy. And in doing so, we've got solar and the wind, which have a huge potential to ensure that, you know, even SMEs get to hold some form of equity in the project. And you move into the production, those plants that are required. What does it mean for us to ensure that people get to participate in this?
Creating value across the value chain.
That's correct.
All right. So you really touched on an important part, just talking about if hydrogen can be a solution to alleviate our energy poverty on the African continent. Now, one of the forms that you can use hydrogen is as ammonia. Now, my question then goes to Mr. Louis from Congo, that ammonia in a decarbonization is a very strategic element. Now, apart from it from playing an agricultural role and in the transport sector, do you foresee any further uses of ammonia within Congo?
Ok, merci madame. Bon, l'ammoniac, à part le côté agricole, l'ammoniac aujourd'hui, c'est un combustible qui, dans quelques jours, dans le transport fluvial, maritime et le transport aérien, l'ammoniac d'ici 30 à 40 ans, ça c'est sûr, l'ammoniac va remplacer le fuel lourd, il va remplacer pratiquement le kérosène. Donc, nous, en mettant ce projet en place, nous sommes en train de voir toute cette projection. Pour le moment, on s'arrête sur le plan agricole, parce que c'est ce que l'Afrique demande. On doit d'abord manger avant d'aller voir demain. Donc, l'ammoniac que nous prévoyons fabriquer, c'est d'abord sur le plan agricole. Ensuite, demain, avec ce changement dont je viens de faire allusion, eh bien, il est sûr que notre ammoniac prendra cette voie-là, c'est-à-dire il sera utilisé par le transport maritime et le transport aérien, comme fuel, comme combustible pardon.
Thank you.
Yes.
So perhaps, Margaret, I'd like to ask you is, can you discuss the current state of storage and distribution technologies, if you may? I think we haven't touched much on storage and distribution. Are you seeing some great examples? Yes, you, Margaret. Are you seeing some good examples around storage and distribution technologies that are coming around?
Yes, sorry, I need to listen to this, otherwise I can't hear you. The acoustics is towards you. Obviously, when we look at our hydrogen projects, they are standalone projects. So you have intermittent power being produced and your offtake requirements as well as your user requirements in your own value chain prefer some form of stability and base load. So in the implementation and in the understanding of these projects, dealing with the intermittency versus a solid off or a solid requirement for stable and secure load factors, we do study storage. We look at storage, electrical storage, battery storage, we look at hydrogen storage. We understand when you put hydrogen storage and do cyclic and pressure cycle in pipelines, it increases the cost of the pipeline. So we understand what is the material that can benefit and make it more cost effective. And then obviously buffer storage when you put these products onto a ship. Doesn't matter what your offtake factor is. And bringing that technology to the countries where we're investing it, by default bring a better understanding of storage into the country for other applications, other grid-connected application, other solar or wind connection into grids. We sit in South Africa and Namibia, the country where I'm actually coming from. We sit with the huge potential for intermittent renewable resources, but we have a constraint on our grid. And trying to find solutions for these standalone hydrogen grid-connected projects, we actually enhance and find solutions for our normal national grid. So yes, absolutely, grid. And then distribution of the end product. Now, distributing hydrogen is a challenge. It's not dense, it's very light. And looking at technologies, how you can make this available for local consumption as well. Not just all putting it into a ship, converting it to another derivative and exporting it. Is also part of the components that we are studying and understanding. And I can just emphasize and say, by attending to the challenges, technological challenges that these projects bring, the green hydrogen projects bring, you help to sort out some of the challenges we are already facing on our grids with intermittent power.
Thank you so much, Margaret, for that really, really important point. Now, just in closing, I want to ask my co-moderator, Sophie, on, or do we have a few minutes left? For
I think we have a bit of time. I think we did promise the audience that we'd take 1 or 2 questions, if there were burning questions from the audience, before we continue. We have a question over here. Can I get a mic, please? 2 questions, I think. Great.
Hi, this is for Margaret. You've mentioned that you're from Namibia. Can you hear me? Okay. You mentioned that you're from Namibia, and currently you are in different parts of Africa. What lessons learned can we, take back to Namibia now that we have a budding green hydrogen industry?
Thank you. Thank you, Lefa, for the question. I want to echo what Joyce is saying, and what Joyce, the organization that Joyce is representing, the African Green Hydrogen Association. It's by learning as a continent from each other. The first thing, there are so many lessons that we don't need to repeat in every country. We can really learn from each other and synchronize. And yes, it might not be always good for the developers if the African continent is synchronized, but in the long run, this is what will bring down cost of capital, is by having a common approach in Africa to the extent that it's possible, meeting still unique requirements in the specific countries. First thing. The second component is having a regional approach. We cannot put up electrolyzer manufacturing plants in every country. We need to agree and have a project pipeline and an industrial pipeline. So as Africa, start looking at ways how we can actually, through different regions, localize different components of the value chain. It should be manufactured in Africa, but you cannot have it all in one country. You need that project pipeline. And then thirdly, about standardization, have common approach with and a common view into regulation and standardization and being pragmatic around this. We will not get it perfect from the word go. It will grow. The LNG sector was not perfect from the word go, but we need to get on with it. And like in Nike, just get on with it. And we need to get on with it. So these are the 3 lessons, I think, not only Namibia, but all countries can learn from each other. And there is dialogue. There's definitely dialogue amongst on private sector developers as well as on government level.
Thanks, Margaret. We have one more question here, please, the lady in green.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the panel. My name is Mandy. I'm a doctoral researcher in the renewable energy sector. And if we're talking about the future of hydrogen, we cannot talk of green hydrogen to be specific. It means we're already looking at all the different renewable energy resources that we can use for green hydrogen. Now, this is my question. Green hydrogen is a future. It might not necessarily be very long, but yeah, it's a future. I'm just curious, what human resource are we not, I don't know if it's the government or it's you, but the question is for all of you. If you're thinking about the human resource, putting in place because I'm trying to think of the students of today, if they are being directed towards these technologies we're talking about, what's in place for them? What roadmap have they put for students who we can encourage for them to train on these technologies, because definitely they'll be leading these technologies in the future. Thank you.
Thanks. Essentially, how are we equipping young people to deal with, I guess, industries of the future? So how are we equipping young people for hydrogen or any industry of the future? Joyce, do you want to come in for that? And Garrith?
Yes, happy to do that. What we've seen in terms of upskilling is quite a number of African universities have started training students on green hydrogen technologies. And one particular shout out to GIZ, because they're also working around then the voluntary and tertiary education. So there's a call for proposal for organizations that want to do that training. So there's already quite a bit of work that's happening. And there's also the network of women in green hydrogen, which again, we can say it's, green hydrogen is a sector where we're seeing more women, which we did not see happening, for instance, in the oil and gas space. Early on, we're seeing women being equipped to take on leadership and technical spaces in the space, in the green hydrogen space already. So I would say, and South Africa is really taking leadership on this in training, as well as Kenya and Egypt.
Maybe if I could just add to your answer, Joyce. So that's a really, really relevant question. Thank you for that question. Skills is such an important part of this journey. And one of the things that I just want to mention, we need to remember that hydrogen has no new skill set. If we look at the value chain, it's solar, it's wind, it's a desalination plant, it's storage facilities, it's electrolyzers. All of these different parts of the value chain have been existing already so many years. So it's really just about making sure that our youth is already partaking in these different value chains. We already, for example, speaking from Namibia, we already have mechanical engineers, we already have chemical engineers, we already have water engineers who are part of desalination plants. So it's really just about taking these different skill sets and making them aware of this hydrogen value chain and putting it together. So we shouldn't worry that it's something new that's from space. It's really just about taking different skill sets and making them work together. Yeah.
And if I can just add a word to this. So from a developer perspective, in partnerships, and partnerships are so important with the government, with the private sector, with organizations like GIZ and other organizations that actually look at employment agencies. From a developer and from an OEM perspective, we can define quite clearly what are the skills levels, what is required, how many of them, by when, and what of this needs to be pre-trained, what needs to be ready to be employed, and what of this can go through on-the-job training. What we find is what we need in some of the countries is a national skills audit to understand, but what is the existing skill set? Where are the strengths? In Namibia, it's mining. In other countries, it would be something else, shipbuilding, for instance. What is the natural skill sets? Where are the gaps? And how should we actually approach to filling these gaps? From an institutional capacity, from a training capacity, and from a general awareness. And I want to come back to the not only employment sector, but also the business sector. It is not just getting people employed, but getting people contracted and getting them ready to be contracted. So again, from a development perspective, we can provide the needs, we can provide the information, and then we need to take the hand with our partners from the government to institutions like yourself and say, okay, how are we going to get from this point to where we need to go in fulfilling these gaps? And it's not rocket science. It just needs some will.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess I want to bring in the gentleman here as we wrap up. I'm going to ask you, the three of you, very short response. If you had to choose one area of innovation in the hydrogen space, what would it be in the next 5 years? Mr. Louis, can I start with you? Just one area of innovation in the sector.
Oui. Domaine d'innovation, c'est l'hydrogène.
You want me to repeat it?
C'est l'hydrogène.
Sorry, I think you said I must repeat it, right?
Great.
I'm testing my French. If you had to choose one area of innovation in the space of hydrogen, what would it be? Just one area. What do you think is a critical area of innovation that the space needs to move it forward?
Non, je comprends bien la question.
It's okay. Let's let Mr. Garrith answer it first, and then we'll come back to you. Yeah.
Oh,
Garrith?
okay. Let me think about it. I would argue really that you need to link that question to what would be the competitive edge of a particular country or particular region. Now, I would say in a South African context, I would invest more in the R&D, but not only research and development, deployment, testing, and also commercialization of, for instance, fuel cell technology and the advances that are being made.
Yeah.
Because that is something that we have, both in the form of the natural endowment of PGMs and so on, and the stuff that we need to actually do fuel cells. But there's also some very good commendable work going on through the ISA program that has been there for quite a while, that I think needs to be given the necessary support and that edge to then give South Africa, for instance, that competitive edge. And I think if we take that regional, taking from what we said earlier about having distinct regional focus areas around comprising an entire African hydrogen value ecosystem as opposed to value chain, I think it would make sense. It may be different in Egypt, it may be different in Namibia, but I think if we take that approach, I think we will be halfway there. The last point, if I can sneak it in from my side, looking at the time, is just a simple one that I think one of the areas that we are constantly also undermining in this discussion, and I think it's driven by the whole export paradigm, is the fact that the reality of hydrogen, green hydrogen, would lead to some geospatial restructuring of the global economy. And I think the notion of industrial hubs and how we prepare for that feeds again into this entire discussion. I'm going to abuse the space because I saw the chair of the National Transmission Company of South Africa in the audience. It makes sense, for instance, for the NTCSA to focus on strengthening the grid in the Northern Cape, in the Bochu Bay area, simply because of the industrial potential that is derived from the development of a new port, proximity to Namibia, the whole issue of minerals transport and beneficiation. The renewable energy potential of that area, I mean, is the best after Chile, I'm told. And I'm not just saying that, Sis Priscilla, because I'm from Namakwa land in the Northern Cape. I'm saying that because it is a fact. So I think that strategically it makes sense from a catalytic project point of view. For instance, for the NTCSA to say grid, Northern Cape, linked to Bochu Bay, catalytic, it will also enable Lutherans in Namibia and even as far as Walvis Bay in Namibia, actually in a practical way fostering that inter-regional collaboration and linkage. Thank you very much and indulge me.
So Mr. Liu, what I'll do is I'll actually ask the question differently because Garrith has literally... Are you, pardon?
Okay.
Are you ready? So I'm going to ask you then is, what's your wish in the next 5 years for the hydrogen sector in Congo? Because, you know, Garrith already hijacked even Priscilla in the room. So we'll cover South Africa then. What's your wish for the next 5 years as you develop the hydrogen sector in Congo?
Alors, madame, dans les 5 ans, par rapport au programme que nous avons élaboré, les 2 années qui suivent là, nous allons finaliser toutes les campagnes sismiques. Nous allons lancer dans les forages. C'est pour dire qu'avant la fin des 5 ans, nous aurons l'hydrogène dans les mains et nous commencerons les premières activités en interne. C'est-à-dire se lancer déjà dans la préparation de la fabrication de l'ammoniac et prétendre mettre en place le système de réseau des pipes pour pouvoir transporter l'hydrogène dans les pays de la zone. Voilà un peu en 5 ans ce que nous comptons réaliser.
Excellent. Would you like to touch on it?
All right. So in closing, our last question will then be to my co-moderator, Sophie. So Sophie, considering that you're a communication expert, and in the discussion today, we've been talking about the economics and the technical aspects of hydrogen, but there's also a softer element to it, which is about raising awareness. So in your view, as an expert in communication, how can we raise awareness and educate the public about the benefits and the challenges of hydrogen? And what role does communication play in this hydrogen journey?
Wow, okay. I think probably Garrith touched on it. I think for me is generally we're not just hydrogen. I think simplification of messaging is important. A lot of people don't even know what you're talking about once you start to attack the word hydrogen. I think that's the first and foremost, is simplifying the industry. The second level is really around the education space that the lady touched on. Is we don't see a lot of hardcore sectors being integrated at even high school level or junior school level. So when you talk about industries of the future, 1 minute I see you. When you talk about industries of the future, what is it that we're talking about? And I think it's something we have to integrate into the education system as we move along. Importantly, sessions and platforms like these help to address the misinformation around what people believe what does hydrogen stand for? What is, is it just a renewable energy, or is it taking over the oil and gas space? So I think there are just a few critical issues to address. But yeah, simplification of the message is probably what's key for me. Yeah. And as the mod MC is on our doorstep knocking and asking us to shut down, I love to leave everybody with an African proverb when I close off a panel. And I think that this is such a mammoth task, whether it's for developers, whether it's for policymakers, the funders, just understanding and wrapping ourselves around this hydrogen space and for an ecosystem. So the proverb I've chosen today is the one that says, when spider webs unite, they can tie up a lion. So there's the need for collaboration and integration around the space, whether it's from a development point of view, whether it's a funding point of view, education point of view, or a business point of view, an SME point of view. We need to understand that at the core of that is also a people-centered development. So thank you to our panelists today. Thanks to my co-moderator. It's nice to have a second moderator on a panel. And MC, we're about to hand back your room, I know. Thank you all for joining our session, and we hope it's been a good one. Thanks so much.
Keep them on stage, and the only reason I'm going to do that is because it's a very quick announcement. So if you could please all stay seated, so I won't go to the podium side. I think this looks nicer this side when I'm here, right? I like that. When spider webs combine, they can wrap up a lion. That's absolutely brilliant. I know I'm paraphrasing it, but I had it visually in my mind. We're now going to go to a comfort break. So it is 1:15 now. If we could all please be back by 22. So that's 15:40. If you could please be seated. We'll be going into the Energy Transition Summit, and we will be hearing from one of the ministers from the country. I'm just not going to tell you because I want you to come back and find out from which country he will be from. So please enjoy your break, relax, and we'll see you back here in the next 25 minutes. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.